She wasn't serious. I knew that even before she finished the sentence. "Fix it by Friday," Celeste Harmon said, not looking up from her phone. "And maybe I'll let you name your price." She said it the way people like her say everything. Like words cost nothing because everything else already costs something you can't afford. She was standing next to a 1969 Chevrolet C10 pickup that her late father had apparently driven once a year to a car show in Scottsdale and never once opened the hood on. The truck was white with a faded red stripe down the side and a small crack in the passenger window that someone had sealed with clear tape a long time ago. The tape had yellowed. The crack hadn't gotten worse. I remember thinking, someone loved this truck enough not to make it worse. I wiped my hands on the shop rag tucked in my back pocket and walked around the front of it. The chrome on the bumper was pitted in 2 spots but otherwise clean. Someone had kept it clean. I crouched down and looked underneath at the frame rails. Surface rust, not structural. Not yet. "When did it last run?" I asked. "I don't know. 2 years ago? 3? She finally put her phone down and looked at me directly for the first time. She was maybe 40, maybe a few years older, dressed in the kind of clothes that don't have logos because they don't need to. "Does it matter?" "It matters a lot," I said. She looked at me like I'd said something unexpected. "My name is Brock Hadley. I am 39 years old. I run a one-man shop out of a leased bay on the east side of Tucson. B&H Automotive, the B standing for nothing in particular anymore, a holdover from when my father-in-law was going to buy in before he changed his mind. I fix trucks mostly. Work trucks, fleet vehicles, the kind of vehicles that people actually need running because their livelihood depends on it. I also take on classics when they come in, which isn't often, because the people who own classics around here either baby them themselves or drive 40 minutes to the dealership restoration center that charges accordingly. I do not own a classic. I drive a 2008 F-150 with 214,000 miles on it and a rattle in the dash that I've learned to tune out. I live in a 2-bedroom house on Crestline Avenue with my daughter, Maya, who is 7 years old and recently decided that she wants to be a marine biologist, which I fully support even though the nearest ocean is 6 hours away. Maya's mother left when Maya was 2. I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because it's context. Everything I do in context of that fact. That it's me and Maya. And we figure things out together. And when I stay late at the shop, it means she's at my sister's house eating cereal for dinner and watching nature documentaries until I get there. She never complains. She just tells me what she learned about whale migration patterns and shows me drawings she made of animals I can't always identify. I'd taken the C10 job because Celeste Harmon had called the shop number, left a message, and when I called back, she'd said I was referred by Dale Hutchins. And Dale Hutchins was a man I'd done right by 6 years ago when I could have done otherwise, and sometimes those things come back around. I didn't know who Celeste Harmon was when I agreed to take the job. I looked her up afterward, the way you do, and then I understood the clothes without logos and the way she talked. Her father had been Robert Harmon, founder of Harmon Capital, which at the time of his death held assets that required more words than I am comfortable typing. She had taken over the company at 34 when he died and had run it since. Various publications had described her as formidable. One had called her the kind of person who wins arguments she doesn't bother having out loud. None of that changed what was wrong with the truck. I had it up on stands by the second day. The engine was a numbers matching 307 small block, original to the vehicle, which was significant, more significant than she probably knew. The carburetor had gummed up from the ethanol in modern pump gas sitting too long, which is the single most common thing that happens to a vehicle that gets stored without stabilizer. The fuel lines were original rubber, cracked in 2 places I could see and probably more I couldn't. The distributor cap had moisture damage. The battery was dead in a way that suggested it had been dead for a while. The radiator hoses were original and would fail within the first 20 miles of serious driving. None of this was catastrophic. All of it was fixable. What I was not expecting was the engine itself. I'd pulled the valve covers to check the condition of the rockers and the push rods, and when I got the passenger side cover off and wiped down the casting, I saw something that made me stop. There was a stamp on the block, not the VIN derivative that belongs there. This was a secondary mark, partially obscured by decades of grime, pressed into the metal at the edge of the deck surface where the cover meets the block. A small punch stamp, the kind of thing a machine shop puts on an engine after a rebuild, to mark their work. I've been turning wrenches for 17 years. My father taught me in the driveway of our house in Mesa when I was 12 years old, starting with a 1979 Silverado that he'd bought for $400 specifically for that purpose. He taught me that a machine shop mark is a signature, that the people who do this work sign it, even when no one is looking, because the work itself demands to be acknowledged. I knew this stamp. It was a small letter H inside a circle, with a line through the bottom, the mark of Harlan's Machine Works, a shop that had operated out of a corrugated metal building on the south side of Mesa until 2019, when the owner, a man named Pete Harlan, had died of a heart attack at 61 and left no one to take it over. Pete Harlan had been my father's best friend. He had rebuilt engines the way other people write poems, slowly, deliberately, paying attention to things that didn't matter to anyone else but mattered to him. He had rebuilt the motor in my father's '79 Silverado when I was 15, and I had sat on a metal stool in the corner of his shop for 3 weekends watching him do it, handing him tools when he asked, staying quiet when he didn't. He never charged my father what the job was worth. My father tried to pay him more. Pete wouldn't take it. Work like this is its own payment, Pete used to say, which sounded like something a person puts on a wall, except that Pete actually meant it. I sat back on my heels next to the C10 and looked at that stamp for a long time. Then I took out my phone and I called a guy I know who tracks engine rebuilds for insurance documentation purposes, and I gave him the block casting number and the VIN, and I asked him to find out anything he could. He called me back in 20 minutes. The engine in this truck had been rebuilt by Harlan's Machine Works in 2009. Bored 30 over. New pistons, new rings, balanced rotating assembly. The work order, which he'd found in a digitized insurance record from a policy held by Robert Harmon, indicated the job had been done as a surprise for Robert Harmon's wife, who had grown up driving a truck like this one, and whose name, on the work order, was listed as contact, Eleanor Harmon. Eleanor Harmon had died in 2011. I put my phone in my pocket. I stood up. I looked at the truck the way you look at something when you understand finally what it actually is. I called Celeste Harmon. "I need to ask you something," I said, "about your mother." There was a pause that lasted long enough that I thought I'd overstepped. Then she said, "What about her? Did she drive this truck?" Another pause. "She learned to drive in a truck like this, my grandfather's. My father had this one built to match it. She drove it to their anniversary dinner in 2009, and then she got sick and..." She stopped. "Why are you asking me this?" "I think you should come to the shop," I said. "There's something I want to show you." She came that afternoon. She was wearing different clothes, less formal, or maybe just different formal. She stood next to the truck with her arms crossed, and I showed her the stamp. I crouched down and pointed at it and told her what it was and who had put it there and what it meant. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Pete Harlan died a few years ago," I said. "He was a friend of my father's. I watched him rebuild engines in that shop when I was a kid. He did this work, this engine. He did it the way he always did everything. I didn't know the name," she said. "My father handled all of it. He just told her the truck was running again." "It runs," I said, "or it will. That part of it is solid Pete's work holds. Always did." She was quiet. She was looking at the stamp, not at me. "The rest of the truck needs work," I said. "Carb rebuild, new fuel lines, distributor cap, hoses, plugs and wires, battery. Nothing structural, nothing catastrophic. Maybe 40 hours of labor if I take my time, and I'd want to take my time on this one." "How much?" she asked. I told her. She didn't blink. "When can you have it done? 2 weeks?" I said. "Maybe 10 days if the parts come in right." She nodded once and walked back toward the front office to get her keys off the counter where she'd set them. I started putting my tools away. "The stamp," she said from the doorway. "Would you have told me about it if it had been someone else's mark? Someone you didn't recognize?" I thought about that honestly. "Yes," I said. "Because the engine's good, and the reason it's good is because someone did the work right. That's worth knowing about the thing you're driving." She looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded and left. The parts came in 8 days. I worked evenings on it mostly, after Maya was in bed, driving back to the shop at 9 or 9:30, and working until midnight when my hands got slow. There is a particular quality to working alone on a vehicle at night, in a lit bay, with the rest of the building dark and the parking lot empty. You hear the work differently. Your hands find things your eyes would miss in the noise and movement of a regular day. Pete used to say that a motor talks to you if you give it a quiet enough room, and I had thought that was romantic nonsense when I was 15, and I think it is true now. The carburetor cleaned up beautifully. The jets were barely worn. I replaced the float needle and the accelerator pump diaphragm, and ran the carb on the bench for 20 minutes before I put it back. The fuel lines went in clean. I replaced every rubber component in the cooling system and flushed the block twice. The ignition came back to life on the first crank. On the 10th day, I started it. The 307 fired immediately. No hesitation. A rich stumble for the first 30 seconds while the choke worked itself down, and then it settled. A low, even idle with a particular roughness that old small blocks have, that I have always found more honest than the smooth silence of a modern engine. An old engine runs with some effort. You can hear it working. I don't know why that seems important, but it does. I sat in the cab for a minute and listened to it idle. The bench seat was original, cracked along one seam, repaired at some point with a strip of matching vinyl that had held for a long time. The steering wheel was a dark, polished wood with a chrome horn ring. The gauges were original. The clock in the center of the dash was not original. It had been replaced at some point with a quartz unit that kept better time, which was a practical thing to do, and somehow also a gentle thing, because someone had cared about whether the time was right. I thought about Robert Harmon driving this truck once a year to a car show in Scottsdale. I thought about Eleanor Harmon, who had learned to drive in a truck like this one, and who had gotten sick before she got many more chances. I thought about Pete Harlan, bent over this engine in his shop, stamping his mark into the block, because that is what you do when you care about the work. I took it around the block twice. It drove straight. No pull, no vibration. The brakes were adequate. I'd recommended she budget for a brake job in the spring, which she'd agreed to without question. At 40 miles an hour on the empty street behind the shop, with the windows down and the warm Tucson night coming in, it felt exactly like what it was. A 60-year-old truck that someone had loved carefully and repeatedly, passing through time. I called Celeste Harmon at 8 the next morning and told her it was ready. She came at noon. I had it parked in the lot with the engine running and the windows down. She pulled in alongside it in a gray Audi that cost more than I make in 2 years and sat there for a moment looking at the truck through her windshield before she got out. She walked around it once without saying anything. She opened the driver's door and looked at the interior. She put her hand on the steering wheel and left it there. "It sounds different," she said. "That's what it's supposed to sound like," I said. "That's Pete's engine. That's how it ran when it was right." She nodded slowly. "My mother drove this to their anniversary dinner," she said. "My father told me once that when they got to the restaurant, she sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes because she didn't want to stop hearing the engine." I didn't say anything. "She used to say," Celeste continued, still looking at the wheel, "that you could tell everything about a person by how they took care of the things they couldn't replace." She took the keys from me and held them for a moment. "Mr. Hadley," she said, "I'm going to be honest with you. When I called your shop, I expected this to take longer and cost more and come back not quite right, the way things usually do. That's not an insult, that's just experience." "I understand," I said. "This came back exactly right." She looked up at me. "I want to understand why." I thought about it. "Pete Harlan did this engine in 2009 and he signed it," I said, "and I recognized his signature. I figure if a man signs his work, the least I can do is respect it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father's estate has a collection, 8 vehicles. They've been in storage in Scottsdale for 2 years. Nobody's touched them. I have one man who's supposed to be managing the storage facility, and I don't actually know if he's doing his job." She paused. "I'd like someone who recognizes Pete Harlan's stamp to take a look at them." I said I could do that. She said she'd have her assistant call with the details. She started to get in the truck, then stopped. "The stamp," she said. "If you hadn't recognized it, would you have told me what it was anyway?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Because it was there," I said. "Because someone put it there. That means something, even if you don't know whose mark it is." She looked at me for one more moment. Then she got in the truck, put it in gear, and drove out of my lot. I stood there and watched it until she turned the corner and the sound of the 307 faded. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya, sent from my sister's number because Maya doesn't have a phone. "Did you finish the truck?" I typed back. "Yeah, buddy, it's done." She sent back. "Does it go fast?" I looked at the empty space where the C10 had been sitting. "Fast enough," I typed. I went back inside and started writing up the invoice. I wrote it the same way I write every invoice, every line item, every part, every hour. Transparent. Not because I expect anyone to read it that closely, but because if someone asks, I want the answer to already be written down. Pete Harlan taught me that too, in his way, not in words. Just by doing it. I mailed it that afternoon. The check arrived in 4 days. The amount was correct to the dollar. There was a handwritten note on Harmon Capital stationery. 2 lines, "The truck is exactly what it should be. So is the work." I put the note in my desk drawer. Not in a frame, not on the wall. Just in the drawer where I keep the things that I want to be able to find again. That evening I picked Maya from my sister's, and we drove home in the F-150, with the windows down because it was one of those October evenings in Tucson, when the temperature finally gives you a break. Maya had a library book about deep-sea creatures open in her lap, and she read me facts about anglerfish for the whole drive home, and I listened to every one of them. When we got inside, she went to brush her teeth. And I stood at the kitchen counter for a minute, not really doing anything. I thought about Pete Harlan in his shop in Mesa, pressing a small letter H into the block of an engine at the end of a job well done, not because anyone asked him to, not because anyone would ever look for it, just because he had done the work, and the work deserved to be acknowledged. Some things you do because they're right. Some things you do because someone taught you that they're right, and because that person is gone now, carrying it forward is the only way left to say thank you. I turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Maya.